racing just a little bit.
Oh my gosh. It's like, is this what it feels like when you like getting a call from an agent, like for representation? Because I don't like this feeling. I'm like hyperventilating right now.
Cable thieves can't stop tea and tails.
Oh, they tried. They tried. Goodness gracious. I was literally having all these scenarios in my head. I was like, do I drive to my friend's house quickly? But it's going to take like 20 minutes to get there.
If anybody's listening right now and wants to know what we're talking about, we have literary agent Jessica Faust joining us today. And Nell's internet decided it wants to act up like crazy. So she has had a very harrowing 30 minutes.
It wasn't fun. It wasn't. And so my tea's been getting cold because I've been freaking out a little bit. I'll drink my Rooibos cold tea, It's still fine.
Oh,
Wait, let me taste
so
if it's
fun.
fine.
I'm doing my hot chocolate today in the cutest little snowman mug ever because we have 3 inches of new snow outside. But the good news this week is there were 2 scenes I've been waffling with for a couple months, and I cracked through them and got it. I finished it on a Thursday afternoon. I sent it to them Thursday evening, like literally ran through one edit to catch weird things. And they came back, they're like, this was one of the best scenes you've written. I literally finished it and sent it to you. This is awesome. I need to stop overthinking.
But you know what? It just goes to show you that with each novel that you write, your writing improves because you learn from your previous stuff. I found it with the novel that I'm currently writing because I'm also now sending it to my beta reading group. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is so good. It's so much stronger than the previous ones. And I'm like, yes, because your voices are in my head the whole time while I'm writing it now. Thank you.
I love that.
Are you ready for this? Because I've been waiting for this whole year. Not really, but I've been waiting a long time.
I am ready.
Ready? Let's do this. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tea and Tales. I'm Madeleine Einau.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. Thank you for tuning in, sharing, and liking our episodes and all of our things on social media. We especially want to thank Clara Dion and Jenny B. Moore. Our episode is on agents and agent research, because for any of you writers out there who want to go traditionally published, agents are part of that process.
What agent do we have on? We already said that, right? But I'm going to say it again. We have Jessica Faust. There is so much we want to talk to you about, but there is so little time. So I think we will just start off by saying thank you so much for being on. We appreciate it so much. You just have like such charismatic personality. You made me feel so comfortable, and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to learn more about this industry. This sounds like so much fun.
Ever since I was a beginning writer, I found your YouTubes and I just would watch them religiously because I needed to learn. I needed to know. Today, we're focusing on doing agent research so that we as writers can make sure we're reaching out to the correct people.
Yeah. As writers, sometimes feel like agents are on this hierarchy and we're just like below them and we're like, oh my gosh, I can't look at them like they're gonna know. I think it is just important for writers to see that you're human, just like every one of us. And just as much as we want an agent, agents want clients.
And that's the very reason that many years ago, probably before YouTube, I started blogging. And then we started YouTubing, was that I would attend conferences and meet up with writers. And there was this very real feeling from writers that there was a hierarchy and they had to sort of, woo us and wow us. And, and I did see agents take advantage of that and not always treat authors kindly. And it bugged me a lot. And so I wanted to find a way to provide information to make authors realize and remind them that even though it doesn't feel like it, this is you hiring somebody to work in your career and to empower authors to remember like what the real hierarchy of publishing is. and who agents really work for and things like that. So I do work really hard to empower authors for that reason.
You started your agency, Bookends. What brought you into wanting to do that?
Honestly, it was kind of a whim. I was working in publishing, and I had started out at Berkeley Publishing and moved on over to, which was then Macmillan, became Wiley, working on the Complete Idiots Guides and the Dummies Guide series. And I was kind of bored. And I was on the subway one day and I thought, I could probably do this job on my own, in my own way, and thought I'd give it a shot. And so originally started as a packager where we were kind of packaging these Idiots Guides projects, but really missed fiction. I missed my Berkeley days. And so that sort of just naturally transitioned over to the agency. So I wish I had some grand reasoning. It was really just a bad day at work and I decided I wanted to try something different.
I wish I could just do that. Be like, you know what? Who needs to pay rent? It's fine. I can just go be a Broadway star.
Right, exactly.
This is just a personal me thing, but when in the flippity flip-flop did you decide to represent romance? Because I have been eyeing your genres, and I was just like, nope, she doesn't have it. I went onto your website, and I was reading your biography, and I read, yeah, she represents romance. And I'm like, Jessica, you need to update your website. So then I went over to Query Manager. And so it's romance again. And I was just like, what? Did the angels hear me cry? Because what's happening right now?
I did. I'm back. So I did represent romance for years. I don't think I've been open to romance. I think it's easy to say 5 years. I was focusing on mystery and suspense and letting other people at Bookends handle the romance. It's 2025 and I need more joy in my life. I have this thing where when I read for pleasure, I read without intention and I don't overthink it. So I go to the store and I grab some books and I read them. And somebody recommends a book and I read it because I can get really in my own head about my reading and spend days just trying to figure out what to read. I was like, I'm going to start picking up some romance and I missed it a lot. It was only a few months ago that I did the flippity flop. And I already have 2 brand new romance authors on my list.
Oh, wow.
Not that I'm not finding joy in my mystery and suspense and my book club fiction. I'm still doing all of that and I'm still finding joy. It's really fun to be back in the world of
a lot of new writers are always upset when they're looking at agents and they're like, well, I thought that they said they did, but they don't. I know they have books that are, but it's not on their list. So what are some of the reasons agents will take a genre off their list, even if you know that they have authors who publish it?
I think for an agent, this is my belief, not all agents work this way. I think that a good agent has to diversify. Just like any sort of business owner needs to diversify. Markets are always fluctuating up and down. And, today horror is hot. Tomorrow it's romantasy. Next week it's historical fiction. I don't know. So I think it's important for agents to sort of have that variety on their list to some degree. Why an agent might sort of fluctuate genres is their list could become full. All of a sudden you could open to romantasy and be like, I just took on 10 romantasy clients. I need to back off on that. You could become oversaturated in it. There are certainly readers who read only one thing, but I think a lot of us switch around here and there, even if it's within a genre, because sometimes you need to refresh your head. I think agents are a lot of the same. I see a lot of agents who feel like they become saturated in one thing and adjust. I feel sometimes our reading preferences change and we pick up something for pleasure and we love it and we're like, I want that. And so the switch might be for that reason. A lot of it is really personal. The market is now getting, not just me, but the market is getting saturated. I'm finding that editors are slower and slower to read in that, slower and slower to buy. So I need to adjust my list to also account for that.
I love how you said that because probably 5 people gave me a pass letter, not rejection letter.
Yes, very good.
A pass letter. They said I don't fit their list right now. And I think that we forget that's the reason why. Even if you've done all the research and you know that they represent what you're doing, maybe they just know right now it doesn't fit a list. And that's why you have to have multiple projects and multiple things that you're putting out there. Because it just maybe next week is when it's going to come on, not this week.
And it could be something super subtle. Like it could be that your book is strictly commercial. and this agent leans upmarket. It could be, somebody who's only looking for books from a dog's perspective, and yours happens to be from a human's perspective. Like it could be so small and nuanced that, I think when you get those passes, you just kind of go, moving on, because there's nothing you can do by reading into it more. And I think as long as you're targeting the agents that at least from the research you've done, are looking for that kind of book, that's the best you can do. That's the best
Exactly.
you can
A
do.
lot of times I would have seen an agent and I go to their website and then they're like, don't really specify what they represent. And I'm like, my friend, how many pages into Google do I need to go to be able to find out what the heck you represent? And it's very frustrating as an author. For example, let's say you enjoyed the novel of a client that they represent. How do you approach them if they don't give you anything to work with?
Well, you read their client. That's enough. They gave you the opening. They were in the acknowledgments. I absolutely do this sometimes when I submit editors. I will email an editor and say, because I read their name in the acknowledgments, I just read such and such and absolutely loved it. I got something coming your way. So I think you just do that. I think that sometimes we get caught in this rhetoric that some agents like to put out about making themselves scary, which is what I said earlier. And so we get caught in this need to get it perfect when we submit. But if they're not giving you full details and you have done the research and you're like, I know they represented this book and I think this is a good comp for mine, you've done your research. That's enough. I think you've done enough. And to your point about people not being clear in their, wish lists or what they're representing, I get the same thing from editors and it makes me crazy. Everybody is looking for a well-written story with beautifully drawn characters. So telling me that's what you're looking for does not help me.
Thank you.
So, totally relatable. But I think if you've seen deals they've made, or if you have a subscription to Publishers Marketplace and you're seeing the deals they made and you see them in the acknowledgments, then I think you've done your research. I don't think you need to then go dig into their website. I think you query them based on that.
Yeah. Well, can I just say that one thing that I absolutely love about your YouTube channel is the fact that you've actually interviewed each of your agents. And I absolutely love that, because just in that short 10-15 minute interview that you did with them, I feel like my personality might mash well with their personality, or how they talk about their craft, or how they talk about their genre or their clients and stuff like that excites me to be like, oh my gosh, I want to put you on my list and I want to query you.
Thank you. Because I need to pick your brain now, because we are going to re-up those interviews this year. Any ideas for what we should be asking our agents in those interviews?
There are some agents out there who will put lots of information down. They'll be like, I love books like this, that, and the other that aren't books that they represent, or they'll say, they'll have lists of the things that they absolutely will kick a manuscript to the curb for, things like that is so helpful for us, because then I can be like, oh, yes, I'm a fantasy writer, but this one happens to be dark fantasy. You don't like dark fantasy. That helps me a lot. I think that sometimes us as writers, we get very frustrated when we go to an agent's website and they say, this is where I went to school and this is where I live. Query me. Thanks. Bye. It's like, okay, so which genres are you doing? You have that extreme of the spectrum too. Agents, their taste can change.
Yeah.
What you're looking for, which is why you're redoing the videos, because their tastes have changed since then. But we also know some of the things that we are consistently interested in and consistently like.
Yeah. And I think that, I think to your point, sometimes it's tricky for us to get too specific. Because then I do worry that sometimes authors get very much like, okay, they only want these things. And what I will say is that I think that what agents are really all looking for is something that surprises them, just like a reader. As an agent and as a reader, we all go to a certain section in the bookstore, or we're attracted to that one table that has all of that genre's books. But even if we think we only like light or dark or this or that, sometimes it's the book that surprises us that isn't necessarily what we thought, and that's what agents are. So sometimes I worry that authors do get overly caught up in trying to make sure they're targeting the perfect agent instead of also just going, I know this agent does fantasy, so I'm just going to send it to them and we'll see what happens and we'll go from there.
Yeah. What I would love to know from agents is who they actually represent as clients. I went onto your website and I couldn't find which clients were represented by which agents. Am I wrong, or was that correct?
Yeah, we don't have a specific list on our website. We do have a cover carousel every agent has under their bio that shows a list of covers and books they specifically represented. We don't have a full page of all of our clients. And there's really no specific reason for that. It's a lot more maintenance to have sort of the links to client stuff if we have that, especially since what we discovered is those actually get used very rarely. You know, people come to our website to see how to submit us. And while knowing who our clients are, I think is interesting, they're not coming to look for books to buy. So they're not necessarily clicking over. But yeah, it's not like a secret. We just haven't done that. Now on our Instagram, we have been posting more and more of books on there, but the truth is that actually doesn't get us engagement either. Most people are not that interested in that.
Really?
I would say if you really want to know who agents represent, Publishers Marketplace is really the best place to see deals, but also keep in mind not all deals are reported there, so you're not going to see everything. And then after that, the acknowledgments sections of the books, which a lot of times you can find on Look Inside on Amazon.
And if you're reading in your genre, so you know what your genre is about and the trends in your genre, you're gonna also have access to a lot of those acknowledgement pages.
Yeah. Yes. Look Inside on Amazon. If you go into Look Inside and do a quick search for agent, sometimes you can find them right there.
So you've already mentioned Publishers Marketplace. Yes. And we talked about Query Manager, where you can go find agents. Is there any other places you would recommend authors to go to find agents, learn about agents?
I think Query Tracker is the original site. They're connected. As far as I know, as an agent, those are probably the top sources. Authors might have other insights to like forums and groups and things like that. A lot of those that I think used to be super popular aren't in existence as much anymore. I do recommend Writers Beware. I believe they're still pretty active. I don't know if they're on Blue Sky. They did used to be really active on Twitter, but they also have a website. And as a writer, if you're ever in a situation where you question the validity of a claims that somebody is making to you, so, sometimes especially self-published authors get approached by people who call themselves agents. Or who call themselves publishers, that's a great place to check that out.
I can't say enough about Writer Beware. I also sometimes use Manuscript Wish List. Is that one that you find is useful?
I haven't been on for a long time, but I do think it's good to be on there. I know some agents go in and update their information on there. Some don't. I wouldn't rely on it as the sole source, but I do think it's helpful.
Yeah, that's why I think it's probably always the best to go to the agency's website to see what the most current genres are they rep and the most current way of submission, because some people still use emails. A majority of agencies have moved over to Query Manager, just to be sure to check where you should submit.
No, and that is very true. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's the agent's website that they should be keeping up. That should be the most up to date, presumably.
I was surprised the other day when I was talking to an author friend who had no idea what Blue Sky was. If you can't find an agent on Instagram or all of their Instagram stuff is 2 years old, go look on Blue Sky.
Yeah, which is basically the new Twitter. It's very similar to the old Twitter format. So it's very much like that. And a lot of agents have moved there.
I know that as authors, we don't necessarily always stick to one genre. They have all these little toes dipped in pies. That doesn't sound very hygienically, but okay. Do you go to an agent to say, hi, I rep this, but I also rep these, and do you cover all of them, or how does that work?
You can, but I would find an agent for the book you've got now. Because, you can have this vision of, I write these 3 things, and I want to be published as a romance author and a picture book author and, a memoir author. But once you get that book written and once it gets sold, everything's going to shift. The whole timeline of how you can write a book is going to shift. You might right now, before your agent, to be writing 2-3 books a year. But once you start the whole editorial process with a publisher and the publicity process and all of these things, you might be like, whoa, not happening. I always say worry about the book that you've got right now, that you're querying right now, and see what happens later. You may decide to transition, but it might not be what this agent can represent. You might be back out on an agent hunt. But on the other hand, trying to find somebody who can represent all of the what ifs in your career might actually land you an agent who's not best for that book that you've got right now.
Oh, interesting.
The agent could switch. I mean, I could say to you, yeah, I'll definitely do let's say I had said, no, I don't really do romance. And then a year later, I'm like, surprise! But also sometimes what an agent is open to might be different than what they can represent. Like what I can do for my clients is sometimes different than what I'm currently seeking new clients for. That can happen too. I think it's just better to find the best person for where you are now and then seeing where your career takes you naturally. Because if you have plans to make 2 books down a mystery and you're currently writing romance, but you get a 3-book contract, the mystery might not happen. Or you might decide, I could make this mystery into a romance,
We had a guest on in season 1 who was a self-published author, and then she got picked up by an agent. They approached the publisher with something the publisher did not represent, but it was one of hers. And they said, actually, we're wanting to break into that. And this is a great book for that. Sometimes we get in our heads and think, oh, they just don't ever like it. Maybe they're just thinking about it, like Jessica was thinking about romance.
Yes, exactly. And the truth is, I took on a book a few months ago that's clearly a romance, but it wasn't pitched to me as a romance. And that also sort of went like, oh, I have to represent this book. And now I have just fallen down a rabbit hole because this is amazing. So like I said earlier about don't try to limit yourself too much when querying, because you never know when that agent who appears not to want dark fantasy might in the back of their head be thinking, I could really use a dark fantasy right now, but it has to be the right dark fantasy, and this one is it. I think sometimes there's this impression that if we send the wrong thing, we're going to offend the agent. But if you're within the realm of the genre, you're okay. Now, listen, I'm not open to children's books of any sort right now. I get a lot of people sending me YA that they're tagging in my query manager as women's fiction. That's clearly not working for anybody. Yeah. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of my time. It's just kind of silly. If you read that, I want books that bring me joy, but you happen to have written this very dark suspense. Well, I still like dark suspense. Don't get caught up in she's liking suspense, but right now she only wants joy. You write that right dark suspense, I'm going to nab it. As long as you're within the realm, go for it.
So what I'm hearing, Jessica, is in my query later, I'm going to be like, dear Jessica Faust, this is not a romance, winky face. And then I'm going to
you do get a lot of that. I know you're not open to memoir, but I'm going to send it to you anyway. But I couldn't sell
that is terrible. Because as you said, like you're just wasting your time, and you're wasting the agent's time, because they do not represent it.
It's like if I, as a fantasy writer who loves my epic fantasies, tries to go to Jessica and say, this is a sweet romance.
Right. And I think the thing is there's also this belief sometimes that you just have to keep going until you find the right agent. But there is a limit. I mean, there are a lot of agents in this industry. Let's face it, a bajillion. Yeah. But I really think there's probably not more than 50 that you can query. I mean, I really do. And I think that when you're sending me your picture book, when I have never represented picture books, I'm not going to say never because I'm doing romance again. What I see is you've just gotten to the point where you're just going to query anybody in the hopes, when what you really should be doing is putting this book aside, because by the time you hit those 50 people, and if you've gotten all passes, which everybody's going to have that book, you should be done with your next book and ready to query that anyway. Because you have started that query process and dug into your next book. And now you can go back to that list of 50. And maybe you've streamlined it. Maybe you're like, that person was kind of a jerk, so I'm not going to send to them anyway. And your top agents kind of shift around and you're rethinking it. But it's still probably only about 50. And that is sort of a rough number. I'm sure somebody's going to go, I found 60, and somebody's going to, oh, I only found 30. But it does depend a little on the genre and things like that. But I think realistically, you have to go, just because there are 500 agents doesn't mean there are 500 agents for my book. And that's okay.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, as we're doing our agent research, find people that are a close match, but don't restrict ourselves to the circle at the same time. So you want to make sure you're in their ballpark.
Yes.
But you don't have to hit every single wicket.
That's the problem we've seen sometimes with MSWL, is people restrict themselves to just the MSWL when it's really the genre we should be looking at.
So I'm going to dip into the traditional publishing, indie publishing circle of life here. So, for example, Sarah Adams, who is represented by Kim, I'm going to mispronounce it, Lionady.
No, you nailed it. Yes. You nailed it. Very good.
You. And she started out as a indie author, and then she got an agent, and now she's a traditionally published author. And so I know when you do querying, a lot of agents will ask, like, if you self-published a novel before, how many copies have you sold? But then secondly, like, what would be a good amount of novels to have had sold for an agent to not be like, no, thank you?
I think we have a lot of authors who have self-published, who have moved to traditional. I don't think there's a magic number. That number matters more if you want to sell the self-published books themselves, if you want to give them up and sell the rights. What it shows is just how successful you are. So sometimes that can play into how much the publisher feels they need to pay you, which is why that number is important. For me and at Bookends, if I'm looking at a fresh book, those numbers are great because it gives me something to start off on when I'm selling your book to traditional publishers. But truthfully, I'm just looking at this book. Can I sell this book as is? And that's what I look at first. The numbers are important because to publishers, it shows how big your audience is, which means how many readers are you bringing to this book? It's a starting point rather than a debut author who, let's face it, is starting at 5, which is family and friends. Whereas, that indie author might be starting at 20,000 or 50,000 or 100,000. But I don't like to throw out a number because I don't think there's a magical number. And I think there are so many variables that play into it. And I also think it depends on the publisher and also everybody's mood that day sometimes.
Mood is definitely a thing.
Yes.
A lot of our audience is newer authors or unpublished authors. They feel so confused about everything that they see because agents are so different, each one. What would your advice be to those authors who are trying to build their list and trying to figure out who to query?
Passes come first. You will always get a pass before you get an offer. And that goes for finding an agent or selling your book. So be ready for the pass, celebrate it. Getting that book out there and getting that first response from an agent is huge. Agents are looking for what you're all looking for when you go to the bookstore. A really great book we can lose ourselves into with the added bonus of, can I sell this? So we're looking at the market to see if it's something I can sell. I am a high concept person. We're all looking for great writing, but I think great writing can be a little subjective. I think we've all read a book where we know the writing is great, but we don't want to read it. Or where somebody else says, I love this book, and we can't read 10 pages because we think it's terrible. It's a little bit subjective. What is great writing? So I think it appeals to each agent as an individual. I think in any art, film, painting, there is a certain bit of a personal feel that we all have when we approach it. But also I can fall in love with a book or the writing or something like that. But I can also think, I don't think the market's going to buy this. And so that's really important too. And one of the things I also like to talk about is you shouldn't be writing to 10 years ago. You should be writing to now. So if you're comping titles that sold 10 years ago, that doesn't mean that's going to sell in today's market. I couldn't take Pride and Prejudice right now and send it to publishers and have them buy it. It's not what sells in today's market. I also say the same because I do a lot of mystery series. I get a lot of authors who like to comp a really popular series or a really popular author, but the first book in that sold 10 years ago. I don't know that I could sell it now. Just because that author is super successful doesn't mean that more books like that would be successful. So I'm looking at a book I really love that is great writing, it's great plotting. And the truth is, I'm also looking for a book that I feel like if I handed it to the bookstore and they sold it today, it's ready to go. I'm going to do some edits. I'm going to work with you to strengthen it. I'm going to work with you to polish it. But I have to feel like if I sent this to editors now, I'd be okay with that. So if you're sending agents out your draft because you need somebody to help you work on it to take it to the next level, don't, because that's not what we're looking for.
That's what your beta readers and your networking and your writer groups, that's what that's for.
Yes. And at all stages, even if you have an agent, you have to remember that agents will do editing. It is now part of our job. However, we also don't get paid until that book sells. So to spend months and months and months editing a book and creating a book is, you know, an income loss for us. And that's important. So it's not really our job to that degree, which is why I say it's really got to be in good shape. How do authors deal with that pass? The most successful authors always have them. If 50 of you right now are listening and are ready to go and go out on submission, not all 50 of you are going to write that next book and go again. Already your numbers have, your competition has dwindled. So if you really want this, you got to keep doing it. You have to improve each book, and you have to take the feedback of your beta readers and your critique partners, and also not just the feedback they're giving you, but pay attention to the feedback everybody else is getting in your group, because you can learn more from that than the feedback you're getting. I've learned so much about myself as an agent from past letters that my authors have gotten over the years, of where my blind spots might be and what I have to look at when I'm looking at books and sending them out on submission.
Ooh, that's interesting.
So I think that it's really hard to take criticism and really understand it. But I think hearing what happens with other people when they talk about somebody's characters or plotting or pacing, you can learn a lot more from that. So if you're not in a group, I would try to find somebody where you're giving somebody else feedback.
100%. I always say being a beta reader for someone else is the greatest gift ever, because it's so much easier to see someone else's, I say flaws in quotation marks, than it is in your own work. Once you actually go back to your own novel and do the editing for it, you're like, well, slap me with a wet fish. Why is this in here?
It's true. You're like, oh, I do that too.
I just pulled out a manuscript that I shelved a few years ago because I was getting requests on it, but then passes on the requests. And I needed those couple of years to let it sit and new eyes to look on it to see all of these little things that are just like, oh yeah, that is a little messy.
But also you've written other things. So your writing has grown. I think sometimes we get so caught up in that one book. Once you put that book out on submission, I really strongly believe move on and take what you've learned from that book to your next book. Because if you've made a lot of mistakes in that first book, it's like when you add too many eggs to your cake mix and then you try to fix it, but you can't fix it, right? So now you're trying to add a little bit of extra flour and some cocoa powder, and now you've just got a gloopy mess, when what you should have done and gone, okay, boom, start over. Let's do a new cake. And I think sometimes we get into that with our books. We get so buried down in revisions that we lose complete sight of what we're doing. Instead of saying to ourselves, you know what? My pacing is really off with this. I don't know how to fix this, but I'm going to pay attention to this with my next book.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. Well, as an author who is currently querying and getting those past letters on this newest manuscript, I think I'm going to come back to this episode quite a lot and remind myself of all the little gems that you left with us today, Jessica. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us.
Thank you for having me. This was fun. Getting to know you both was great.
Thank you.
We like to keep it short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on the paper.
And if you love what we're doing here and you love the amazing guests we have on, like Jessica Faust, then go to Instagram and Facebook and Threads at Tea and Tales Podcast, and TikTok and Twitter/X at Podcast Details, and go follow us and comment and share and like and everything else. And go to that little purple icon on your device and go give us 5 stars so that we can go up, 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 up to the top.
And if you want to hear more from Jessica, we will have the links to her YouTube and other social media in the bio. Happy writing.
Bye.